In this video, we're going to be taking a look at how we can get an animating object out of Maya and put that into UE4 as a skeletal mesh. All right, let's go ahead and take a look inside of here in Maya, and we'll see the setup that we have. So this is just a very simple kind of sphere kind of object that you see here like this. And what we have is a very simple skeletal setup as well. So if you want to create a skeleton, if we go to, let's see, the rigging part here, we go to skeleton and we do create joints. All that happened here was I did a create joint, and then I had the grid on, and you can actually snap to the grid whenever you do this. So if you hold on X, you can snap that first joint. I can go ahead and hit enter for that. And I just named this joint world root. So in UE4, it's going to expect that you have a root bone, and it's going to be at the 0, 0, 0 point origin of the world. And after that was created, you can just duplicate that. I'm going to hit Control D and make another one and just pull it up here. If you want to parent a joint to another one, you can just middle mouse drag it on top of that, or you can take it and you can select it and tap P and it'll parent it. So this was renamed to world root, and then this was a sphere root. So the sphere root is in the center of what the sphere is here. Let me go ahead and delete these joints like that. The other thing that we can talk about is these controllers that are set up here. So all I did was make a NURBS primitive and made a circle like this, and you can see I can scale this up, and I gave different scales to this. So I made basically a control that's for the floor, and then you can see that I've got the sphere control, this parent, this bigger outer one, so I can select this and move this around, and it'll move this and this ring together. And then I've got this ring, which actually really is controlling this bone here. So I've got independent control, so I can rotate this thing around like this. And I've got some scale that I can do on this. And this is all separate from whenever I actually move this piece here. So you might want some additional control like this. So this becomes a new kind of pivot point for this. And all I did by doing that is just like the joints, we've got a hierarchy that you saw here, and these are set in a hierarchy. So this one is parented to the floor, and then that floor moves everything like this, and then this is the bigger outer ring, and then this is a child of that. And so as I move this one, it moves the child, and if I want to do something separate from the child, we've got that going on. So you saw that we've got these two joints here. These are just set up to where they're controlling those joints. So all you got to do is select like this floor controller, and then hold down Control and select the root here. And if we go to the rigging, we've got constraints, and what I did on here was go to a parent constraint, and I told it to maintain offset. You shouldn't have to worry about that, but I just use that. Maintain offset will look and see if there's any offset between the controller and the joints, and it'll still hold those positions. So if you get anything weird kind of happening, you can put that on there. So I hit apply for that, and it actually would do a parent constraint. And once that's done, you can see if I selected this, I could move this, and because it's moving this root joint, it's going to move the sphere joint as well with it. So that moves everything together. And then actually what I did is took this controller, the child, and then I held down Control and did the sphere root and did another constraint and do a parent with this maintain offset on there like that. And then now that controls this joint, and anywhere where this controller goes, and it's a little bit easier to select the controller, that joint's going to go along with it. Now the other thing that I did was I selected this controller and this root joint like this, and I did a constraint, and I did a scale constraint like that. So that way, if I do anything with scale on the controller, all I got to do is select the controller, and I can scale this thing any way that I want, like this, and then the sphere changes with it. So that's the very simple kind of controls that were set up for it. After that, then I just set up some simple animation for this, and there's nothing special about the animation, but there's just kind of this feeling of it kind of jumping around just a little bit like that, right? The other thing that I did was I set up this selection set. So every time you export out to UE4, you're going to want the same components to export out, especially if you're doing a skeletal mesh. So what I did was I made a folder called meshes, lights, and animation, everything else like that. That's not super important, but if I select the sphere and I select holding down Control, the two skeleton pieces, that's what I'm going to want to export out. So to create that set, you just go create sets and do this right here with an option for it. I just called it UE4 underscore export set, like that. And that gave the selection set, so I can always get back to that. If you don't know anything about binding a mesh to a skeleton, that's pretty simple as well. You would select your mesh first and then select either like the root of your skeleton, and then you want to be on animation, no, not animation, rigging, and then go to skin, and let's go to bind skin, do that. Normally for games you might put this max influence down to 4, but 5 will work just fine. And you can hit apply for that. Since we're doing something very, very simple like this, after it's bound, you can select it and then convert from object mode to verts. So you can hit Control F9 and that'll select all the verts in there. And once you're in this rigging, if you go to skin and if you go to paint skin weights option box, this will bring up a whole thing for painting skin weights. But we don't want, we just have something very simple. So we want all these verts weighted to the sphere root. So I can just select this like this and hit flood, and it'll weight all that very easily. So now we have all the components that we need to get outside of Maya and push this into UE4. And like I said, to export, you're going to want to right click on here like this, and then say select set members after you have that set. And that way we can always export this out the same every single time, like this. Now I know before we export this out, I could do this, and the only problem is the animation wouldn't come over because we're using these controllers to animate everything with. So there is a step that you would have to take before exporting out. You would want to bake your animation out for this. So you could select your bones that you have like this, and if we go animation, so we're going to pull this down and go to animation, and then there's under key, and we can go to bake animation like this, and we can tell it to bake. You could tell it to do a hierarchy, or you could just tell it to, you know, everything below or what's selected. I just got these two guys selected, so that should be fine. And then you can also tell it the time to bake it from, right? So you can do a start and end if you want, or you can do time slider. Time slider is everything we see right in through here, so that's what I want. And you could actually bake it to an animation layer if you want, but you probably don't need to worry about that too much. So we'll go ahead and hit apply, and you can see it's going to bake all that animation data from the controllers, and it's going to put it onto the actual joints itself. Okay, so now that we've got the animation on there, now we can right click on here again and say select set members, and this time we're going to say file, export selection, and do the option box. We'll put it on the FBX export type. If you don't see that, make sure you go to Windows, Setting Preferences, Plugins Manager, and load up the FBX exporter. That's on here, and not exactly sure where it's at. You just have to dig for it. It'll say FBX on there. Make sure that's loaded. So I'm going to show you the presets for this. So we'll do Edit Presets, open that up, and you want to include your geometry, and you want smooth groups, tangents, binormals, smooth mesh, and I'll leave that there for that. You also want animation turned on. You want to make sure that you have deform models, skins, and blend shapes turned on. And I think that should be good for that. And you close that out and say export selection. I'm just saving it to an FBX area. You can call it whatever you want. This is what I called mine for that. Okay, so let's go and hop over to UE4. Okay, here we are in UE4, and this was pretty simple. I just made a under content, I just made a new folder, and I called that skeletal meshes. And then within that, I made a new folder and called it animating ball. Now you can separate this out into, if you wanted to get really granular, you could make a new folder and call this meshes like this, and then, you know, new folder and do animation like that. But not too worried about it. We can just throw everything in this to this folder. So if I right click in here and say import right here like this, we can import this in, and I'm not going to overwrite what I've got here, so let's go ahead and import that again, and then I guess I'll have to say yes to this, so we'll do that. So because I want to show you the import options for this, let me just make a new folder, and I'm temp like this, because I need to show you the actual import settings. So if I do this import, I'll do this one again like this, and then this time you can see it's going to, this is what it's going to look like for you the first time. I want to import a skeletal mesh, and I'm going to tell it to import the mesh. If there's already a skeleton, you would be able to find it within here if you've imported it before. If we open that up, there's some more options for that, for this stuff with some smoothing group information, things like that. So you probably don't care about that too much. If you want to import it, your materials and textures that exist down here like that. So what we can do is just go and say import, and we'll import everything in together. And you can see when it imports in, we've got this here. It's going to give you the mesh, so we can double click on that. And let me pull this window down so you can see this information a little better. So this is what it's going to look like within here. It's going to actually show you there's a tab for skeleton, the mesh, and if there's animation on there, it's going to show the animation. So I'm just middle mouse scrolling to kind of see this a little better. And I'm going to try to zoom in over here. So if everything worked correctly with the animation, you should be able to see that. And what I'm going to do is we would save all this. I've already got mine kind of pulled in here like I was showing you from before. I'll right click and say save. So if you need to save any of those, you can do that. The other part is if we take the mesh and we drag it out into the world, you can see we've got a copy of it. We can control the scale. I can lock this together and say like 4. The other thing that you can see is that it's going to tell you, do you want to use an animation blueprint to animate this thing, or do you want to use an animation asset? If you just want to straight up animate the thing that you had from Maya, use the animation asset, and you can click right here and you can find the animation that you imported in with it. You can tell it to loop. You can tell it that it's playing whenever you first start off, and I believe this arrow is down here like this. The initial position says something about like what's the frame, where is it at in the time of the animation, like that. So you could have it start in different positions from each other. The other thing is you can change the play rate, so you can make it you know, a quarter of the speed. You can make it half speed. You can double the speed, quadruple the speed. So that's really up to you what you want to do with it. So I can play here, and you can see I've drug out a couple different copies like that. So we can kind of see just with that one animation, we can get some motion going and get a couple different looks for stuff on that.